I know that you haven't heard from us for about a month, and if you're wondering what we've been up to, a lot of it has actually just been trying to stay warm on this little boat that we're living in the marina right now while we're doing the catamaran build. We got some really bad storms right after the new year, and up until about 3 days ago, we actually spent a good amount of our time iced in here, but now temperatures are finally warming up again, so we're comfortable, no need to worry about us. Although during that time when the highs here were maybe 18 to 20 degrees, the inside of our boat with our two little space heaters going, we didn't have a working thermostat, so I want to say it was probably in the upper 40s, but we just got under a lot of layers, like sleeping in our beanies and things, and then crawling under our electric heated blankets, which is probably our favorite thing about this boat in the winter. We just live under those. Otherwise, we have just been working on getting the boat interior ready to paint. In our last video we put out, we talked about how the hallway of the master berth between bulkheads 5 and 6 was pretty much ready to paint, and then as soon as we could get that cleaned up, we were going to paint that as well. Well, unfortunately, we had left the catamaran for a few days to go see family right after doing that paint job, and when we got back, we walked into that freshly painted head and found what had been a smooth surface when we left was just kind of covered in debris. Even though we had gone through and washed and wiped and cleaned everything, we're thinking it's from the overhead that still had just dust that kind of settled after a few days. So now what we're going to do is get the rest of the surfaces of the entire interior ready for paint up to that final primer stage before we actually go through and paint anything again, so that way we can clean out all dust and contaminants from the boat so we don't have that issue again, because that was really the only area that we cleaned, so we don't know how much of it was just us bringing that dust in as we went in and out between layers, so we want to make sure that does not happen again. We're hoping that doesn't take us too much longer to get to that stage. Again, we're warming up now, which means we can get those fairing compounds to cure faster. We can start doing more rounds of primer, but let's go through and see how the boat's looking right now. So since we haven't really been able to do anything new because we are still working on this sanding, fairing, priming thing, let me do kind of a detailed walkthrough of our catamaran, show you where we're at with everything, and kind of like what's started us on this path of having to wait. Walking into our masthead, you can tell there is still that shiny white paint on here. The only painted surface in the boat right now, and if you take a look at all of these new bottles and sponges and everything that Matt has got in, that is because he is trying to wet sand and polish out some areas of this boat, and I'll show you what we mean by going into the shower up here, because that is where it's most noticeable. Straight ahead of us here we have bulkhead 3, which there's storage on the other side, and then the inboard side of the shower. And what we're noticing, especially at the top here, and this probably is going to be cleaned out now, is there's so much flaking coming down here. So for this surface, yeah, it feels really shiny now. Matt has definitely wet sanded it to a smooth surface and is trying to buff it out, but I don't know if the light will show. You can still see like little kind of half moon marks in there. So that is one of those things that we don't know if we can still keep like polishing and buffing it out, or if it's going to take down the layers that we put on. If you'll start seeing the fairing compound underneath, and then if we just have to go back and paint it anyway. So this is kind of really just a test area to see what it's like to wet sand and polish out an area that didn't quite come out as we wanted it to. Especially the shelves here. These had just so kind of like much dust and things on them after a few days of leaving them alone. We still think it probably came from this overhead that we did wash if you watched our last video of painting, but I think we have to go through with like an air hose and just make sure every little bit is out, because this up here was definitely rough, and then any area that sticks out further, that kind of had stuff on it too. So Matt has gone through, polished these all up, and so we're still debating on if we want to potentially go back and paint this again, but because there's so much other painting that has to be done, it doesn't have to be decided right now. Still loving this overall, though. It's so nice to be able to walk in here and just see what one finished area is going to be like. But going aft, this hallway, we thought that we'd just be able to get back from our little holiday with parents and paint it. It's already had pretty much all of its coats of the finish primer on. There's very few areas that needed touching up, so we thought that we would just kind of go through and scuff it with that 320 and then paint it. But because we now want to get the whole boat ready so we can clean it, this is pretty much done here. There's a few areas that just needed little bits of attention that we're kind of going back to and addressing now. Like just forward of the dagger board case right down by the floor, and there's going to be some kind of cabinet, basically just closing that off, why that's never been finished. But down here, Matt has just applied some of our epoxy fairing compound to smooth out little rough edges there. The area leading to our hanging locker, that is still good. An exciting thing, we've actually started looking at paint swatches for the accent walls. So barely be able to see it here, but this is bulkhead 5. It'll be here and also leading to our master berth here, but most noticeably it will be up in the bridge deck at the fore and aft parts of the bridge deck. If we keep going further aft, now we've had to turn the aft berths kind of into storage areas as we work on everything in the bridge deck. These have gotten another coat of the finish primer. They were just about completed. But since with our Alex seal, they recommend that you don't do that last sanding until like 96 hours before you paint. We know that these have gotten their last coat of finish primer. They don't need to be sanded right now. It will be done just before we go to paint. So right now we're still focusing on the areas like the V-berth that's getting high build primer. I'll show you that, a few others, and like everything that's going to build up to getting that last coat of finish primer. Although there were still just a few small areas of touching up right on the openings of this cabinet. Matt primed it the other day, and then kind of under the seat there too. So this has been our master hall, which is something that we've always focused on for a long time anyway. Pretty much done, but now let's go to the guest hall because that is where a lot of the work has still been happening lately. We'll go down the front set of steps here and into the V-berth. Got this all cleared out and ready for some primer just after lunch today. This is an area that has probably needed the most work because if you remember just about a year ago right now, we had that storm in the tent that kind of like ripped the tent open. We had to hurriedly just shove everything inside the boat that we had in the tent. It all came and sat in here until probably 2 or 3 weeks ago when we put it in another storage container, opened up the space again. So this has not been worked on for at least a year, and you can tell we've been doing so much touching up with that total fair coves around the steps and the chamfered panel there. The area under the outboard little storage cabinet. Do you guys remember when I was doing this? And I was so excited just to get that painted? How things have changed. We're going to be at our little support shelf there. We never really paid attention to the underside, so that's been getting a lot of attention, as well as this annoying little curve right here. This window will get cut out, but just from this support shelf here, kind of like leading up to it, is a weird angle, hard to access. So we've kind of been ignoring that. And then, oh geez, this lovely line that I still hope that we're going to cover with the trim. So this is one of the few areas left that is still going to get our super build. So we'll actually do this last because we don't really mind if our finish primer gets on it, but we're hoping that's the last coat of high build that we'll need in here. Maybe just a little bit leading aft toward the guest head. So as we look toward the wet head here, we've got little storage shelves, but once again, the areas underneath always seem to be forgotten about. This is where our fuel lines are supposed to go, so we're still going to have to eventually kind of like box that in or do something, but just the coves leading up around the wall and then the area under the door trim. And probably these forward steps are going to get another coat of the high build primer as well, just because the corners of the coves here, you can see, just got a lot of new fairing compound in them. But the bulkhead's leading up to the bridge deck, so this is part of the galley, the inboard galley side. And then bulkhead 5, this is actually one of the walls that's going to get that accent color that you'll be able to see very visually once we get that on as mostly part of the bridge deck. But these two, I think we're going to save as bridge deck painting, so that's going to be probably next week. So going into our wet head here, this inboard side where the cabinet is, pretty good. I don't think we need to do any more touching up here. The interior of the door frame, I think Matt has just done some light touching up here, but mostly it's been down at the edge of our shower pan. That just got a lot of fairing compound in there. It's gonna have to be sprayed again. I think we're pretty set with how these have turned out. So again, just like in our master side, they have gotten a coat of finished primer. We haven't sanded them yet just because it shouldn't need any more primer and it's not supposed to get its final sand until just before we paint it. But as we look at these aft steps here, they all have the Dicom on it, just so we can make sure that we've hit everything once we do sand it off, and kind of like a little outboard side here. And then once again, the berth is now our storage area so that we can work on the bridge deck. What's been really kind of exciting for me now too, though, is since we're starting to focus on the bridge deck, we've cleared things out, can really get a feel of how that space is going to be, especially on a sunny day like this. I have had to go through and kind of like tape and tarp off some of the windows behind me here so that they don't get paint on them. So it's not the full daylight, but get a pretty good idea of how open and airy this space is going to be. So we've got our salon settee area here. If you look at the settees, they still have our Total Boat high build primer, which is like when we very first started priming a couple of years ago and just haven't really touched it then. But since those are going to be covered with cushions 95% of the time, our main focus isn't that. What we do want to get done today with some of the finished primer is the cabin sides. Now these originally had come to us fully gel coated and finished, but since we've changed the color a little bit from what the Max Cruise factory does, we've just done a light scuff sand right now with 180 to get it kind of like a dull finish. And so we're gonna get some finished primer on there today. And because the exterior of the boat is covered in that shrink wrap, this is actually mobile, this section here. So I'll have to go cover that. So in the nice days, we can take that out, get some fresh air and sun, and I'll actually show you in a second. Here's a quick shot of front windows out. So in the summer when it's nice, you can let that fresh air in. But right now, there's still snow on the ground. But all of the other window openings here are fully covered. We don't want to get that primer on it, have it dry, and then flake off the next time that we go to paint. So we'll actually need to touch this up here. You can tell I've just taken a little tarp and kind of sticking that in the areas. I do have to tape that down there because that's not staying. So that's kind of our protection for these spaces. And right here is where the cabin side came to meet with the cabin front. So we've bonded this area right here. We've faired it, I think, done a light coat of priming, but it was still uneven. So this definitely got a lot of filler. And not so much down there. On the other side, you can see it too, where the two pieces come together. But with all of this open space, I've just been kind of lounging on the settees here, imagining what's gonna be like when we've got sea views around us and when the doors behind me here are open. Because remember, that middle one flips up into the cockpit center. The other two slide out into their pockets. And so that whole area just opens up. Other small projects in the salon, the baseboards there have been getting touch-ups, just kind of making sure as well too that these edges here are flat because the cabinet doors are gonna just line up with them, so they need to be pretty perfect. So I've just been kind of, going through these little areas that haven't been getting as much attention as, the bigger surfaces. And our poor galley is the only other area that we've kind of been storing things. So yeah, we've got a ton of stuff on the shelves and stored into areas that will be, like fridge and drawers later. But bulkhead 5 here again, we haven't really touched that yet. We're gonna wait till we're doing the whole galley area, but these cabin sides will get done. Here you can kind of see better, especially in that forward area there where the two pieces of this came together. So we're ferrying them out and blending them. The outboard galley side, we haven't really paid too much attention to the countertop, and there is going to be a dish drying rack in here made of the white oak. But just again, the seams of where we bonded the cabin side, and Matt has been giving those a lot of attention. So those will get a spray today. Aft and bulkhead 6, we haven't really done too much there as it leads down. And although the frame of this window here is going to get painted in that cloud white, which is in our head, the rest of the surface here leading down there is going to be that accent color. And we haven't decided yet if we're going to spray it or roll it on. If we do end up rolling it, we'll probably just end up getting it from whatever hardware store it comes from, the Home Depot, Lowe's, I can't remember which the color we liked I had gotten. So we're not giving as much attention to bulkhead 6 here and bulkhead 5 there, because they'll be getting their own kind of color, probably a different application. And the doors behind me here, you know, they've only gotten their 1 coat of primer so far, but since we need to take them off to be able to paint, that won't be happening until spring. We're really just trying to get the interior finish, which we always say that we're getting close, but I'm still pleased with how things are coming along. And that is why you haven't heard much from us, because it's really just a lot of this detailed sanding, fairing that you've seen before. I think in the next couple of weeks, I might make an episode of all of the sanding tools that we have used from start to finish, now that we've had the full experience of them and we're finally getting paint on, so we know kind of like what works and what doesn't, at least for us. So I will start working on that. But if you have any questions or things you want us to address on that, make sure to let us know. Next time we see you, we'll have finished coats of primer on most of these surfaces, getting ready to paint. And then before we know it, spring will probably be here, or at least warmer temperatures, and we can get to working on the exterior parts again, which I'm really excited about.
To pieces, yeah, I need it. Won't you bend them all?